is Grahame Morton. Grahame has been the Principal Advisor on Asia and the Americas since 2017 at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He has led in this role the strategic policy development and also contributed to organisational governance. His senior roles include New Zealand High Commissioner to India, Acting Deputy Secretary, Asia-Europe Meeting Ambassador, Deputy Head of Mission in Washington, and membership of several Asia-related boards. Today, Grahame will address the government's 7 policy principles underpinning New Zealand's participation in the Indo Pacific and regional organisations. Welcome to the stage, Grahame.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Esther. It's nice to have the old team back together. 7 policy principles sounds a little bland, a little boring. So we'll hopefully make it a little bit more interesting. I would just like to acknowledge a few people, though. Namaskar to everyone here today. So thank you for coming out. All of those people interested in the India-New Zealand relationship across Auckland and in many cases across New Zealand. So it's fabulous to have people here. Welcome to His Excellency, the Indian High Commissioner, Mukesh Padashi. Welcome to New Zealand, that is, as well. It's still relatively early in your term, so it's great to have you here, and it's good to have Bihar represented so well. I had an EA from Bihar, so I will pass this back, that you're doing a good job. Also, Samir Handa, thank you to you, to your team, to all of those who've worked on the organisation of the event. It is a real pleasure to be part of this panel and to speak at the summit again. The last time I spoke at an INZBC Summit was in 2016, so it's nice to be back in front of a group. And it's also, and to pick up some of Esther's words, it's nice to see that the agenda has actually moved on and changed a little in that time. So we've gone through a period of growth. I think I'll just pick up one point that Kevin was talking to earlier around trade. The trade growth has happened in New Zealand and India around 40% since 2014, with growth in trade and goods and services. But what that broad statistic doesn't really get is that there's also been a change in the makeup of trade. So 40% is a number, but there has been significant change. So of the number, the 0.5 billion in goods that we were looking at around 2014, a large percentage of that was coal. The coal industry has really changed. What we've seen since then is a significant drop in that kind of commodity trade and a huge growth in the range and nature of trade that's going on between New Zealand and India, and that provides a really good base for future growth. I'd also pick up just one number. We use the number 2 billion for New Zealand exports to India, and that's the base of goods and services, including the education and trade number, and that is a significant growth on where we were at in 2014, notwithstanding the change in some of that good stuff. But what I want to do here is just widen the aperture a bit to talk more to the politics of the relationship, and particularly around New Zealand Indo-Pacific policy settings, which are broadly within where our trade policy sits. So our position, New Zealand's position on the Indo-Pacific, has evolved significantly, and it's been part of a growing regional conversation around this issue. One factor is definitely that the regional impact over several years now of India's Look East and Act East policies. So India's engagement with and across the countries of Southeast Asia has made some past descriptions and some concepts of the region just seem representatively incomplete. The establishment a decade or so ago of the East Asia Summit has also been very important in political terms. The East Asia Summit includes India, it includes the US, it includes New Zealand and Australia, and it includes all of the major economies of North Asia and Southeast Asia. And it has very much grown into being the leading regional political forum of the region, based around a very strong core of Southeast Asia support around ASEAN, and it's established a new and more expansive organising conception of this region. In effect, the East Asia Summit has changed the political organisation of the region from being based on an oceanographic border at the Pacific Rim into more of an organisation of a community of countries which have interests across a larger range of issues. So those interests and linkages can be described in terms of people movement, in terms of management of the global commons, in terms of transport and security interests, technology networks, as well as the important and traditional economic and political relationships that we have. This time of evolution has seen the term Indo Pacific arise as a real subject of debate and regional summitry, and there have been different concepts for what it means proposed and discussed. This was inevitable, and it was welcome, and it was required in order to consider the implications that arise whenever you're going through a regional political reorganisation and a rediscussion of what it means. In June this year, we had a significant event with ASEAN, the countries of Southeast Asia, releasing their Indo-Pacific outlook. And in the process, that embedded the term Indo-Pacific as the agreed description of the region that was encompassed and endorsed by ASEAN. What this means is that in ASEAN forums, New Zealand will now consistently use Indo-Pacific terminology as well. And it's natural and likely with that usage, it will become more ubiquitous in New Zealand over time. New Zealand will still have occasions where we'll use different terms, whether that's an APEC, which is essentially an Asia-Pacific structure, or perhaps more so in the Pacific Islands forums, where the regional narrative that's owned most strongly by Pacific Island partners is that of the Blue Pacific. However, when we look across all organisations, the government has spent time in identifying what our key interests are in delivering an environment that is conducive to New Zealand prosperity and security. Where this has led is to the identification of 7 key principles, which we will aim to preserve or enhance in the course of New Zealand political or official engagement. Those 7 key principles as they apply in the Indo-Pacific are openness and inclusivity, transparency, freedom of navigation and overflight, adherence to international law, open markets, respect for sovereignty, and ASEAN centrality. India has also been evolving its political positioning towards Asia and at the macro level, its conceptual vision for the region, and it's quite similar to New Zealand's in some respects. In June 2018, Prime Minister Narendra Modi outlined the Indian vision of the Indo-Pacific to the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. And if you're looking for a general exposition of what India's vision is, that's probably the best speech to go to. But in summary, the Prime Minister's articulation was of a region that was free, open and inclusive, reinforced ASEAN centrality, and upheld the sovereign equality of nations. It highlighted, like New Zealand does, observance of international law, freedom of navigation, and peaceful settlement of disputes. Now, there's nothing in those headline ideas that Prime Minister Modi has promulgated that New Zealand would disagree with. Now, of course, New Zealand and India are also not the only countries that value these principles, but it's really encouraging that from opposite ends of the vast Indo-Pacific region, we find broad similarity in areas of absolutely fundamental outlook. You might ask why the discussion of definitions and vocabulary is at all relevant and important. And the reason is because when the superstructure that you create by more aligned regional political outlets is complete or can be demonstrated to be strong, then it helps partners speak with a real shared vocabulary and a focus on delivery of results between them. And it bodes well for our engagement on practical initiatives because that, by their very nature, requires countries to look to negotiation and concessions, but within a broader aim. We saw this when Prime Minister Ardern met Prime Minister Modi in New York last month. They were able to speak clearly across some common vocabulary, but they also made clear, and the Prime Minister made clear, that New Zealand was looking to do more, that we were looking to build stronger ties and broader ties with India. So that commonality is very much at the base of what we're trying to do. New Zealand has ambitions to drive our political security and trade cooperation forward, to look at building on those shared principles, and to make New Zealand and India very important partners within the Indo-Pacific region, promulgating ideas as well as outcomes. Thank you.